This week, Ray Dalio has been in the news once again. He sat down with Yahoo Finance for an interview and controversially stated that he believes Bitcoin may very well get banned by the US government. And I know that a lot of young people in particular are going to dismiss his claims immediately, or his opinion immediately, and just chalk it up to him being just another old investor who doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to this new technology. And while personally I never actually make investment decisions based on what Ray Dalio says, I think it is interesting to explore his arguments for why Bitcoin may very well get banned and what impact it could have for you as a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency investor, but also for people like myself who don't invest in cryptocurrencies, but how that may impact stocks and other parts of the financial markets. And I've actually heard quite a lot of arguments for why Bitcoin may or may not get banned, but Ray Dalio's argument, even though he brushed over it very quickly, from the research that I did behind the scenes after watching the interview, it actually is a very valid argument and something that you probably haven't heard before. So stay tuned. In this video, I'll be breaking down his argument in full with some extra research that I did on my own. So sit back and relax. And if you do get some value out of today's video, I would very much appreciate it if you could take the 2 seconds to leave a like on the video. And hey, if you get a ton of value out of today's video, then consider hitting that subscribe button and you will get notified when I post new content. But with that said, let's jump into the video. Now, before I go through and show you the clip with Ray Dalio's argument and break down why he thinks Bitcoin may very well end up getting banned, I want to address the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency fanboys that are probably screaming at their computer or getting ready to type an angry comment who are suggesting that it actually is impossible to ban Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And in terms of a government actually implementing a complete ban that eradicates the use, transactions, and ownership of Bitcoin, for the most part, it's true. That is not something that is possible. Even if a government has strict controls over the internet access of citizens within a country, it is very difficult to argue that you could prevent people from downloading the private wallet software that is required to hold Bitcoin and prevent access to full nodes that would allow people to make transactions on the blockchain. For example, in Egypt, where Bitcoin has been banned, 4% of the population still own some kind of cryptocurrency. In other countries like Saudi Arabia, the government has imposed restrictions on financial institutions for trading in cryptocurrency and restrictions on commerce and businesses using it. But anywhere that has tried to ban Bitcoin completely or even partially has not been successful in eradicating the use, ownership, and transactions of Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. However, a complete ban on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that eradicates them completely in terms of transactions and ownerships is not actually necessary for it to make sense for the US government to impose restrictions, and that is the argument that Ray Dalio makes in this Yahoo Finance interview.
Bitcoin has proven itself over the last 10 years. It proved it hasn't been hacked. It's by and large, therefore, worked on an operational basis. It has built a significant following. It is an alternative, in a sense, storehold of wealth. It's like a digital cash. And those are the pluses. Bubbles are financial assets that have imputed value. It's an asset that doesn't have intrinsic value. It has imputed value. It's whatever we think it is. And if you look at some of the bubbles in the past, a great book is Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of the Crowds by McKay, 1845 or something. But he talks about the South Sea bubble and he talks about the Mississippi bubble and so on. It is when people love it. It's the dot-com bubble and so on. And that could be. So when you look at Bitcoin, it's a possibility. It's an alternative because there aren't many such assets. There are not so many assets that might have intrinsic value that can't be messed around. As far as the government allowing it, the history was, banks always used to exist. And then with the Bank of England, they decided that it was in their interest to have a monopoly on banking at a country. And so what we did is every country treasures its monopoly on controlling the supply and demand. They don't want other monies to be operating or competing because things can get out of control. So I think that it would be very likely that you will have it under a certain set of circumstances outlawed the way gold was outlawed. And you're watching that question arise in India today. India today is making the move to outlaw possession of it. Okay, so we have to see what that means. Now, can they do it? Now we get into the particulars. My understanding from people who are sort of in government surveillance and go on is, yes, they can understand, they can track it, they can know who's dealing with it. I don't know, like I'm not an expert on that. But there's a whole way, is it private wallets? Is it not private wallets? How do you do this, and the other thing? I would suspect it would be very hard to hold up against that kind of action. So that's what it looks like to me.
The core of Ray Dalio's argument here, and he does talk about a number of other things as well, but the core of his argument here is that Bitcoin may be banned or restricted in order to stop money flowing out of cash and bonds in an inflationary environment. And the reason why Ray Dalio thinks this may very well take place over the next few years is because cash and bonds are both terrible investments at the moment. Bonds are terrible investments because they have negative real returns, meaning they have a positive nominal return. On the coupon, the bond that you're buying does give you a positive return, but once you take into account inflation, you're actually worse off at the end of the life of that bond. And cash is also a bad investment at the moment. With all the money printing, it's very likely we're going to enter an inflationary environment to at least some extent. Whether that's 1 or 2% or whether it's more, there will be significant devaluation of holding just cash. So Ray Dalio argues that the US government may very well put in place some bans or restrictions on Bitcoins to stop people from using Bitcoin as a store of value as they flood away from cash and bonds. And I know that may sound ridiculous to you, right? It sounds insane that the US government would impose bans on holding or transacting in some particular asset, or Bitcoin, for example, but it actually wouldn't be the first time that the US government has done this to a very, very popular and significant asset. In 1933, the US government created an executive order that required citizens to sell their gold to the government for $20 an ounce. During this time, there was massive uncertainty around financial institutions and huge mistrust of the central bank and the government. And as a result, a lot of people started to trade in their US dollars for gold at the Federal Reserve. This was something you used to be able to do when there was the gold standard, when the dollar was backed by gold. You could trade in your US dollars for gold. And when there was all of this mistrust between the banks and the government and the citizens, a lot of people started to trade their money in and started to hoard onto gold, intending to use it as their main currency as the mistrust of the US dollar continued to rise. And with the majority of gold being seized and forcibly traded back for US dollars, the government was able to force citizens to continue trading and engaging in business in US dollars rather than turning to gold. Now, it's important to note that the monetary system in the 1930s was very, very different to how the monetary system is run today. And over time, the monetary system, even in the United States, has changed dramatically. From a long time ago, people actually using gold, to then a period where you were using paper money that was backed by gold, that was the gold standard era, to today where we have a fiat currency and it is controlled by a Federal Reserve. So over time, the way that money has been controlled by the government has changed. But what hasn't changed is the government's desire to control the currency that is being used within the country. So it is reasonable to expect that if Bitcoin becomes a genuine threat to the US dollar in terms of being the currency that people trust within the United States, it is reasonable to expect that they may very well implement some kind of ban. And like the ban on gold in 1933, a ban on Bitcoin would not mean that Bitcoin is gone from the United States. Back in the 1930s, even though it was illegal, people still held large amounts of gold. People still transacted in gold, they still traded in gold, and they still exchanged it for goods and services. People still did that illegally. And the same thing will be true with Bitcoin. But what the ban did do was it stopped massive capital flows out of the US dollar and into gold. It stopped the avalanche or the snowball effect of people mistrusting the government and running to the Federal Reserve to exchange their money in for gold, further accelerating the devaluation of the US dollar. It actually prevented that from happening. And a ban on Bitcoin, even though people will still own Bitcoin. If you want to go out and buy Bitcoin and it's banned, you very well can. It's fairly easy. It will be fairly easy to do. It will stop big funds and financial institutions transacting in it, and that will stop the big capital flows away from the US dollar and into Bitcoin. So instead of dismissing the idea that Bitcoin could be banned because it's technically impossible, I think it's important to consider that it may very well happen because historically this kind of thing has happened, and also to explore what may happen if a ban did end up happening. I said happen way too many times in that sentence, but even if it's not probable that a ban takes place on Bitcoin, it is a good thought experiment as an investor to think about what could happen and what could the impacts be on the financial markets. And I think the main question that people would probably want to know the answer to is, if we assume that Bitcoin was banned in terms of ownership and trading it, would the price of Bitcoin go down? And I think not necessarily. I think it's likely that the price of Bitcoin would go down, but I certainly don't know. And a couple of reasons why I think it's possible that the price of Bitcoin would go down if some kind of ban was implemented is because you and me, as an individual holding a few $1,000s of Bitcoin, we can continue to hold Bitcoin. Whether it's illegal, sure, you could still continue to hold it and it's very hard to trace. But what's not hard to trace is big corporations like a Tesla who have billions or hundreds of millions of dollars invested in Bitcoin. And I think those corporations, if it was made illegal, would very likely offload their ownership of the asset in order to reduce their liability there. And as a result, that could result in some significant capital outflows from Bitcoin. And I don't know whether that would cause a collapse in its price, but it may very well start a snowball that can't end up being stopped. Because what may end up happening is big corporations and funds that hold a lot of Bitcoin, they may sell initially, and then what you may see is some individual investors starting to lock in some profits, because let's be honest, Bitcoin has performed extremely well, particularly over the last 12 months. So if there was some kind of catalyst that started to send it down, you may see a lot of people want to get out of the asset during all of this uncertainty and start to lock in some of their gains. However, some people will make the argument that it actually may go up in price if there is some kind of ban. Because the reality is, if there is a ban, most people would still be able to transact in Bitcoin if they wanted to, even if it is illegal. So if that's the case, and the ban on Bitcoin creates even more mistrust around the government and the US dollar, then you may actually see people flowing towards Bitcoin while this ban is put in place, because people may mistrust the US dollar even more and wonder how else is the US government going to control our financial freedom or our capital, and as a result move towards Bitcoin, creating more of a demand around it. And if I'm being completely honest, I personally haven't formed a complete or solid or firm opinion on this topic yet, and I may very well never form a complete opinion on this. This is one of those things that I think Warren Buffett would categorize as either important and unknowable or not important and unknowable, meaning the unknowable part meaning that there's too many factors that we don't really know what's going to happen, whether it's going to be banned, and we certainly don't know whether it would go up in price, stay the same, or go down in price, or even to what magnitude, because there's just too many factors, and we haven't seen this play out. It's one of those things that are unknowable. Whether it's important or not kind of depends, I guess, if you're planning on investing in the space or whether you think that it will have other impacts in the market. But overall, it's just something I'm interested in learning about. And this goes with a lot of things that Ray Dalio talks talks about monetary policy and inflation and interest rates. A lot of the time, they're things that I really don't know what is going to happen. I really don't know what's going to happen in the future, and that's okay. That really doesn't affect my investing style. I will still look at individual businesses and invest in companies that have proven to perform well in a variety of different economic conditions. But I do find it interesting to kind of talk about these things, and I think a lot of people do. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. And as I said at the start of the video, if you did get some value out of it, I would very much appreciate it if you could take the 2 seconds to leave a like on the video and hit subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. But with that said, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.